Hello everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. I'd like to dedicate this week's podcast to the memory of the late Keith McIntosh. He was a friend of mine, he was a stalwart of the Wimbledon Windmilers, my running club that I was part of when I left in southwest London, taken far too soon from us last week at the age of only 51. He was a sub 250 marathon runner. He was an absolute stalwart of the area. He was the club chairman, the men's captain. He took on all these different roles at the club over the years. He was a fantastic mentor to so many people, as well as being an outstanding runner. One of my fondest memories of training with the club is keeping up with him for half a lap of the running track. The man was a legend. And a mentor, fellow coach as well. I was truly shocked to hear of his passing. And so I wanted to dedicate this episode to him, in his memory, and I wanted to cover sort of the last conversation we ever had was about running Cadence. So I thought, you know what, let's continue this conversation between us. Now, I'm going to be looking at Cadence through all three sports, swimming, cycling and running, and how it affects our performance. Starting off, we'll do the sports in order. Starting off with swimming. Swim cadence, otherwise known as stroke rate, is a measure of how fast it is that your arms are turning over in the water. Now, I thought, right, let's double check that I get my facts correct. Because you have stroke rate and you have stroke cycle. And so a stroke rate is whenever one arm enters the water, that is considered to be sort of a count of one. And then you have stroke cycle, which is measured for every second arm entry. So if you imagine your left arm enters the water and begins the stroke cycle. You start to push that arm backwards, then your right arm enters the water as your left arm is exiting, go through the motion, then as your right arm is exiting the water and your left arm enters the water, that is one complete stroke cycle. From when your left arm enters the water with the first stroke to when it enters the water with the second stroke. I hope that makes sense. Whereas stroke rate and cadence that we're going to be using today is going to refer to every time one arm enters the water, whether it's left or right. And the way this is typically calculated with your swim watches is that it takes the number of times that it detected an arm entering the water and it doubles that number. So I just wanted to make sure that we all had our language correct and so that we're all reading from the same page before we get started. Now, the relationship between stroke rate and stroke length is a really important one. Because if we have a really high stroke rate, that is the amount of sort of strokes that we're taking, our cadence, but we have a very poor stroke length. So you're taking lots of arm cycles, but they're not very long and they're not good quality. We are going to thrash around in the water and go absolutely nowhere. And this is the approach that a lot of blokes take. They get into the pool, say, right, I'm going to put in a length, and they have this really high stroke rate, and they're thrashing all over the place. The stroke is absolute rubbish, and they finish the length exhausted, get out and feel like, here we go, whilst they, make their way to the spa or something, okay? This doesn't fly with triathlon. You can't simply rely on an increased cadence to make you go faster. Equally, if we were to have a really high stroke length, a really high quality of stroke, but a very low cadence, that's not going to be ideal either. And you would have seen people who swim like this, who swim really quite sort of, they're not especially fast, but they're very long, they're very measured, they're very, picturesque as they cut through the water, barely causing any ripples. I mean, that's not ideal either, because you're giving away so much speed if you're interested in such things, which a lot of people who swim like this, they're not. They want to get in, they want to enjoy being in the water, and more power to them. But if you're listening to this, you're probably a triathlete, and we have races coming up. We want to improve our swimming ability, so we need to find this sweet spot between stroke rate and stroke length. Now, the stroke quality also comes into this. How good is your catch? How clean is your hand entry? How much water are you moving? What's going on with your arms under the water? All of these are super important, but it's very hard for us to be able to quantify your stroke quality. We can't simply measure that as easily with a single metric like we are with stroke rate. So I am using the word stroke rate and cadence interchangeably here. I understand that. I apologise if it's confusing. But yeah, we can't simply sort of measure the quality of the stroke. So we do tend to look at stroke rate and stroke length as being two really important sort of signifiers of performance. Now, most newer triathletes would do really well to lower their stroke rate. And focus on the technique, the quality of the stroke, actually engaging more of the muscles, moving more of the water. You know, lots of amateur swimmers, they're just spinning their arms in the water hopelessly because they think that the more effort that they put in to their swim and their cadence, the faster they'll go, and it just isn't the case. A lot of them would do well to slow down your stroke rate. If you are listening to this, chances are you aren't one of these sort of plodding, what they call sort of overglider swimmers, who has this long dead spot at the end of their stroke as they glide along. But if you are, or you know somebody who is, then actually increasing the stroke rate, eliminating that dead spot, is actually, you know, one of the simplest ways to get faster. However, having a higher stroke rate, it does require more in the way of oxygen because we're making more, we're moving our muscles more per minute if we have a higher stroke rate, which increases. I'm sorry if you can hear my dog panting. She's sat here lying on my lap, loving her life, and I can't bear to kick her off. So as we have to take more muscle contractions, that requires more oxygen. Alternatively, we could get ourselves into an oxygen debt to be able to maintain this, which is why a lot of sprinters will have a very high stroke rate because they are not working aerobically, they are working anaerobically. If you look at somebody swimming the 50 metre freestyle or 100 metre freestyle even, they will be at an absolute rapid stroke rate because they are taking every single lever available to them, and they're going, I need to kick hard, I need to push the water hard, I need to have a high stroke rate because I am simply trying to smash out a short distance as fast as I can. But we are not those people. We are triathletes. We're looking to swim from anywhere from 400 metres up to 750 metres. And if you watch the 400 metres, if you go onto YouTube and you search, 400 metre final in the Olympics, and you compare the stroke rate of the sprinters to those who are swimming this 400 metre, I mean, it's sort of quite a long distance in swimming, really, the 400. If you look at the difference between the two, it is phenomenal. It really is. Almost an entirely different sort of style of swimming. I think a lot of people, they'll see Olympic swimmers who are sprinting and they have this really high stroke rate, think, right, that's how you swim fast, that's how it's got to be done. But it just isn't that simple, especially if you are sacrificing sort of stroke length to be able to make up this high stroke rate. Now, because this is aerobically challenging, a lot of cyclists and runners who move into triathlon, they will be able to maintain a high stroke rate much better than most people will. And if you look at the sports of running and cycling, as we're going to get on to, generally speaking, as long as you're not taking things to extremes, the faster you push the pedals around and the faster you run, but sort of the faster your cadence when you run, you will go faster. But that just isn't the case with swimming, and that can be really hard for people to get their head around. And to get them to slow down their stroke rate, and to get them to really think about the elements of technique, rather than thinking they can just muscle their way around the swim. Additionally, if you have a lower stroke rate, then you are going to be placing more of a load on your muscles, because with your lower stroke rate, you'll probably be engaging more of the water, pushing it back harder with each stroke, and you're going to be developing more in the way of muscular fatigue. And, we need both of these to be able to swim well. But what I do recommend against is having a really high stroke rate in the swim of a triathlon. Meaning that when you get onto the bike and the run, you're already feeling quite sort of tired aerobically. I do think that swim is a good time to really lean, have a slightly lower stroke rate, than what you feel you could achieve, and to really lean on your upper body. To really go, okay, I'm going to take really big, powerful, forceful strokes here. Not too slow, but not too fast either, to really propel myself through the water. And I've noticed a real improvement in my swimming since I started doing this. Now it is, for me at least, somebody who hasn't got the world's sort of greatest level of upper body strength, it is fatiguing on the arms, on the chest, on the lats, on all of these elements of our body. But I do think it's worth trying to see how you get on with it. Once we get into the open water, things can be a little bit more difficult working out our cadence because, well, we're surrounded by a lot of other people. And that puts us all into a sort of a slight sort of sense of, I wouldn't say sort of feeling like we're in danger, as it were. But, it gets the heart rate up, simply being surrounded by so many people, legs and arms flying. And we will naturally increase our stroke rate a bit in that environment. Added into the fact that if we're swimming in rough water, if we've got waves, if we've got swell, if we've got chop, if we've got lots of people around us, we're going to naturally increase our stroke rate to help ourselves cut through the water as we swim. And this is a pretty good idea, it has to be said. As much as anything, if you had a really low stroke rate when you're swimming open water in a big pack, you're probably going to get knocked and barged about by the swimmers who are coming past and are working at that higher stroke rate, and they're just kind of creating space around them. If you've got a really long, slow, leisurely stroke, your chances of being walloped do actually increase a fair bit. Now, a lot of people who are sort of swimmers who've hit a bit of a speed plateau, as it were, they may do well to actually try to increase their stroke rate. That can be a good way for somebody to improve their swimming, as long as you don't get to the point where it becomes ridiculous. And a way that people like to train this is they use a tempo trainer, which is something that's a little device that slips under their swim cap, and you set it to beep at certain intervals. And you can go, okay, I want to swim at this stroke rate. And so you can program the tempo trainer to do just that. And it will, as you swim along, whenever it beeps, you want to make sure that your hand enters the water. And this is a good way to hold you to account over a swim, to make sure that you are maintaining this stroke rate. Because chances are that when you start out, when you do your first length, you have to be slowing down to make sure that you aren't going faster than that beep. But towards the end of even something like a 200, chances are that you'll find yourself having to work that bit harder to keep that arm speed up to avoid yourself from slowing down. Now I can hear the question that's on your lips. Simon, please just tell me, what's a good cadence? What should I be aiming for? And this is incredibly difficult to answer, as I'm sure you can imagine. So there are a lot of factors taken into consideration, such as somebody's aerobic fitness. As I said, if somebody is still developing aerobic fitness, then their stroke rate is going to be lower. It takes into account somebody's height, somebody's arm length. All of these different factors influence how our stroke rate is going to be affecting us. Now, if we have somebody who is short, they are going to, generally speaking, have a higher cadence than somebody who's really tall with long arms, because it just takes a lot more energy to spin big long arms around than it does shorter arms. And especially some ladies who can be closer to the sort of the 5 foot mark, maybe under, they can have really quite high stroke rates relative to a bloke who's 6'2" with an arm span like an albatross. So I don't like to say, oh, you should aim for this, but generally speaking, somewhere between 50 and 65 for most people is probably the way to go. I think that if you are much lower than 50, then you're probably giving away speed. If you're much higher than 65, as an amateur athlete this is, then your arms are going to be going around a little bit too fast to be able to maintain a good stroke quality and length. Again, these are just guidelines. I don't want you to come away from this, look at your swimming data and think, oh, I've been doing it wrong all along. I need to go right back to the drawing board. I mean, it's possible, but without seeing you swim, really hard for me to say anything like that. So these are just general guidelines. And again, this is going to be higher during sprints. This is going to be lower during longer swims. If you consider somebody who's doing a marathon swim, maybe maybe in sort of the 40s. And that may not be a bad thing because they are just plodding themselves along. Now, Swim Smooth have a ramp test protocol that you can follow that will allow you to find your optimal stroke rate. I feel that it would be sort of quite plagiaristic, really, if I shared it here. So jump onto YouTube or Google, stick in Swim Smooth ramp test, and that'll be able to give you an idea of finding, a way to find what for you is going to be close to an optimal stroke rate. But again, don't get too wedded to this. One final word of caution as well. I know plenty of people who will swim with a tempo trainer under their hat so they can keep a high stroke rate when in open water. Just bear in mind that whilst tempo trainers float, if it does slip out under your cap, there is a decent chance you'll never see it again. And they're not especially cheap. So what I'd recommend instead is going out, doing a loop and checking your cadence at the end of the loop. And be able to work out for them, maybe I do need to make sure that I increase that. Have a look at the chart, see how the cadence behaves over the course of an interval. And, just sort of do your own research, play around with it, see what you can do. Next up, I'm going to move on to cycling. And this is the sport where cadence, I think, has the most discussion. Of all the three sports around, single sports and sort of cyclists as well as triathletes, because the rate at which you pedal your legs can be very easily controlled relative to the other sports using your gears. So if you are in what I term to be a very low gear, so an easy gear, in fact, let's just use easy and hard gears because that's so much less confusing for everyone. Due to the nature of the cassette, being in high gear or low gear could be sort of taken either way. I'm just going to say easy and hard. So if you are in an easy gear, you can spin your legs around really easily to the point where your legs could be going around at a really high cadence and you can be going, just about nowhere. If you were in your easiest gear possible on the flat, your legs are going to be going round and round and round, and you're going to be going really slowly. You're going to get no return for that effort. Equally, if you are in your hardest gear, your cadence sort of on the flat, chances are it's going to be very low. If it's not, then your gear ratios are off, and you need to get yourself a bigger, sort of a harder gear on the bike between the chain, basically the bigger chain ring on the big chain ring on the front. But yes, hello Poppy. Do you want to say hello to the listeners? She is very happy about something today, and I'm not sure what it is. We need to make sure that we have something resembling sort of a sensible cadence on the bike. Now, what I would deem to be sensible, personally, would be anything sort of above 80, really. I think that if you have a cadence below 80, you're just not being very efficient. I think that you're relying on leg strength. You're not actually really using much in the way of aerobic fitness. And I know plenty of people who've come from the gym and they've started road cycling. And from people who are used to sort of to squatting, heavy weights, they can keep up this slower effort for a long time, really. Whereas if they were to cycle at closer to kind of 80 or 90, they get out of breath really easily. And it's a rite of passage really for a lot of new cyclists who come from a gym background to start off with a really low cadence and to slowly be able to increase that cadence as their aerobic fitness improves. Equally, if your cadence is too high, again, any cadence over sort of 100, I think, maybe, let's say 100. Anything over 100 for a prolonged period, chances are you're not only not sort of being really as efficient as you can on the bike, but you're also burning yourself up for the run a little bit. And there is a real school of thought around some triathletes that it's better to have a lower cadence on the bike, use more of your leg muscles on the bike, so that when you get off of the bike and onto the run, you can then switch to that higher cadence, which uses more of the aerobic system. So we're leaning on a muscular system on the bike, and our aerobic system on the run. Now, this really is sort of up for debate. I guess I can definitely understand that. I can see how that might sort of occur for people. That I guess that makes sense. But it depends whether if you are riding along at 80 to 85 RPM, it depends on whether you're giving away speed on the bike relative to what you could be achieving at 90 or above. Something else to muddy the waters is that somebody's cadence in a time trial position on a time trial bike is going to be lower than on a road bike. Now, if I am going like the absolute clappers, if I am racing a sprint distance, for example, my cadence is going to be somewhere around 100 for the most part. Over a short race, I can really sort of afford to turn myself inside out, and I will have, really quite a high cadence. I know it is lower if I'm on the TT bike. It's probably closer to sort of the 95 mark. If I'm on my road bike and I am doing a max effort, I'm going to be sort of around about that 100 RPM mark. I find that if I try to slow down, it just takes too much of a toll on my muscles. My legs are screaming at me, we can't keep this up. And so I have to increase the cadence to use more of my aerobic system. Now that tells me that as a cyclist, I should be working on improving my muscular endurance as much as I should be my aerobic fitness. These things can give you insights. Now, back in the sort of early noughties, a very famous cyclist you may have heard of by the name of Lance Armstrong came along, and he was a big advocate of riding at a higher cadence. And he claimed this was the secret behind his success. Now, I think we all know what the secret behind his success was. However, he really did sort of bring this high cadence idea to the world of cycling, and a lot of people got on quite well with it, if I'm honest. If you are especially in a cycling event, as opposed to a triathlon, the whole sort of discipline is really very different. It's a lot more different than most people realise. You are going to be looking at different performance metrics, whether you are looking to ride up a hill as fast as you can to try and get a gap on a group, or you're just trying to prepare yourself for an Ironman marathon. These are two very different things to do. And the world everybody sort of swung towards this idea of high cadence. You've got to increase your cadence drills, because, a lot of people are really fickle, regardless of what the science says. A lot of people like to just try to emulate their heroes. And, fair enough, there's nothing inherently wrong with riding at a high cadence, but some people sort of simply can't. In the same way that swimmers who have short arms are going to have a higher cadence, same can be said for cyclists. If you have a cyclist with short legs, they are going to be riding at a higher cadence than somebody who has got really long levers. It's just sort of physiology. And I try to avoid calling many people out on having a low cadence because, when I look at athletes' data, because, you don't know what could happen. It could be they've tried many times to ride at a high cadence, but it's just not, useful for them. I do draw the line when we do get down to like the mid-70s, especially if somebody's riding erg mode on the trainer and they're at a lower cadence. Look, are we going to be riding this cadence on race day? Oh no, I'll pedal faster on race day. Well, especially as we get close to a race, we do need to emulate that within our training. We can't just hope that it all comes together on the day. Now, should you be working on cadence drills? Should you be working on spin-ups and, maximum cadence efforts? Well, I don't think there's any harm in it. I think that having flexibility as a cyclist is really underrated for triathletes. The ability to be able to pedal down a hill rather than just having sort of to freewheel your way down because your legs can't keep up, they can't pedal fast enough. I think that's a real advantage. You could really sort of benefit your performance by having this in your toolkit. Additionally, if you've got a load of momentum going down a hill and there's a little short hill, you go straight into a short hill at the bottom, the ability to get out of that saddle and to be able to carry that momentum by doing a little bit, sprint's the wrong word, but by really pushing around threshold for a short period to get up that hill in just a few seconds, then yeah, having the ability to do that, I think, is really pivotal. Again, there is no sort of hard, fast answer here. I can't give people a target of what cadence is they should be riding at, but it is worth doing high cadence efforts. It is worth doing lower cadence efforts in your training, sort of to see how they feel. Now, I'm not an advocate, honestly, of getting on the turbo trainer and saying, right, I'm going to do some low cadence training to build leg strength. There's definitely, lots of people who are a big fan of that. Personally, I'd rather my athletes do hill reps. I think it's a much better way to develop leg strength than doing low cadence intervals. Helps teach them how to ride up a hill as well, because guess what? There are hills on race day. And I just think, it's more interesting as well than sort of having to hold these low cadence efforts. But I think that some sort of high cadence efforts, it's definitely worth having them in your training, just again to help sort of increase your vocabulary as a cyclist, as it were, be able to improve the rate at which you're able to hold a cadence over differing terrain, different scenarios. Speaking of hills, there is a big misconception that people have, which is where they go, okay, for this ride, I need to average 85 RPM. Because that's what I think is going to be the best for me. And they get onto the hills and they push 85 RPM. And they're on the downhills and they're trying to push 85 RPM. Realistically, doing that is just going to burn a lot of energy. It's not the wisest way to spend your energy trying to hit a cadence on the hills that matches those on the flat. If you look at even the world's very best cyclists, they will be using a lower cadence going up, most hills. Obviously, if it is just a false flat of 1 or 2%, probably not going to make any difference. But when we talk about target cadence, we are talking about on the flat. We're not looking at trying to make sure that when we finish our ride it says average cadence of 85 RPM, so we can get a rubber stamp and say, good, we achieved the purpose of that workout. Okay, that's not really good training. It is about finding a sort of a balance and understanding that on hard hills you're just not going to be able to maintain that cadence without completely burning yourself out before you even are halfway up the hill. Cadence on the bike is generally measured in one of two ways. Either it's with a cadence sensor, which straps around your crank arm, and it measures how often it passes the chainstays on the bike, and that gives it an idea of the rate at which you're cycling. The second option is one that's integrated into a power meter. Now, I'm not going to go into power meters in a huge amount of depth, but I will explain the relationship between torque and cadence. Now, if you have a power meter, you will see the number that it displays. Go, oh, I'm riding at 150 watts, I'm riding at 120 watts. And you may wonder where that number comes from. Well, power is a measurement that is taken as a product of cadence and torque. So torque is the ability of you to be able to generate force in a circular fashion. So it goes, how hard is somebody pushing around on the pedals? That's torque. In addition, how fast are they pushing around the pedals? Because if you have somebody who is putting very little force through the pedals and they're pedaling very slowly, like somebody just sort of really slowly making their way to the local shops, I mean, that's absolutely fine. But they're not going to go very fast. If you imagine a sprinter charging towards the finish line on the Champs-Élysées at the end of the Tour de France, they are going to be putting huge amounts of force through the pedals and pedaling incredibly fast. And it's this relationship between cadence and torque that really influences our performance as cyclists. Now, you could have high cadence, low torque, or low torque, high cadence, and still get the same power number. And that's why I think it's worth us at least sort of discussing cadence, because it could be an easy way for you to generate more power. If you're able to just increase your cadence slightly, that may have a real impact on your cycling speed. Alternatively, if you lower the cadence and push the pedals around a bit more with your legs, you may find that makes you faster as well. I know that it's frustrating that I'm not going and telling you need to go out and ride this hard, ride at this cadence, that's the fastest way to go. But most of the people who speak like that, most of the coaches who talk in absolutes, a lot of the time they don't really know what they're talking about. They're not really looking at the individual, A lot of coaching, a lot of triathlon is about trying to understand the individual rather than simply going, oh, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. Something else I feel I should touch on here is crank length. Some people think that it's a really good idea if you have longer cranks to help lower your cadence, or shorter cranks will help increase the cadence. Honestly, this is a pretty bad idea, because when you are changing your crank length, it's not just your cadence you're affecting, it affects the rest of your fit on your bike. So I really do recommend, unless you've been to a bike fitter, because the way that the trends are going is that a lot of people are going for shorter crank lengths because they feel, for most people, it just puts them in a more efficient position. Unless you've gone to a bike fitter and they've recommended that you go for a longer or a shorter crank length, honestly, I recommend you just stick with what you have rather than investing in something that may not actually really make much difference. Next up, we have running. Now, running speed really is all about stride length and cadence. I mean, it's not all too dissimilar to swimming in that respect, but I guess swimming is a lot more technical, running less so. Now, if you were to look at somebody running the 5,000 meters on the track, you would see that they are going at approximately sort of 180-ish strides per minute. If you were to look at a sprinter, such as Usain Bolt, they would be closer to 255 to maybe even 260. That is a lot. That is blindingly fast. And that's because they only have to hold that for 100 meters. But the truth of the matter is, between that really long stride length and that really high stride rate, that is what makes for good sprinting. Now, if we look at the 5,000 meters, again, we're going to have that sort of 280, maybe even, not 200, 180, maybe even sort of 185 for some runners if they're doing that final kick. That is a pretty high cadence. And a lot of people throw this number around as being 180 as being the goal. It's what we should all be aiming for. And I mean, I disagree, because as we've discussed, physiological factors very much have an impact on somebody's peak cadence that they're able to achieve. But also some people, they just don't have the aerobic fitness, especially masters athletes. Chance of them being able to maintain 180 for prolonged periods is quite low, really. They just don't have that aerobic system to be able to maintain that. And so I wouldn't say that 180 is the target, but the issue about going too low with running is that it does increase the risk of injury. If we are in the sort of 160 range, 165, 168, something like that, I really would look at increasing that, because with each step you've got more force going through your body, which does increase the risk of injury. If you're taking lots of lighter steps, you're not putting quite as much through each step, because you're maintaining more in the way of momentum. You're not crashing down quite as hard with your foot as you run. Additionally, if you have a lower cadence when you're running, this can increase the chance of things going out of kilter, your knee wandering around, you're more likely to heel strike, which isn't a massive problem in itself, but if given the choice between midfoot landing and heel striking, I think most people go midfoot. It just, you don't always have that same sort of quality of sort of gait. Really, gait's the wrong word, isn't it? Of sort of run stride as you're running with a low cadence. And unlike the other sports where there is sort of a relatively wide window of acceptable cadences, I say that for runners, most runners, we want to be looking around about 170 to 180. It's a relatively narrow window. And that's not to say that it doesn't feel really quite different. If I was to run at 170, that would feel quite unnaturally slow to me. Additionally, if we are running at different intensities, that is going to have a real impact on it as well. If I am running a VO2 max interval, for instance, if I'm going really hard for a short period of time, then I may be over 180. If I'm doing a longer run, I tend to be around 175, 176. 170 would be unusually low for me. That would feel slightly uncomfortable. But some people, if they're going at a really hard interval, they're at 175. If they're going an easier run, they might be at 173. And if they, for them, going sort of the 168 is what might feel unnaturally slow for them. That being said, I do think all runners could work on improving their cadence. This isn't like swimming and cycling, where trying to have a cadence that is too high can end up sort of having a real negative impact on us. As long as we're not sacrificing stride length for cadence, I think it is worth developing your cadence in your training. And I mean, the best way to do this is with short, hard intervals. I don't think you necessarily need to go, right, I'm going into this session and I'm going to target this cadence. I will do that occasionally for runners who are really quite slow with their cadence, where they are sort of around the 160s, and I go, look, we really need to increase this. So let's do some short periods, aiming for 170 to 180. It's difficult to maintain the same speed. So if I was to set somebody a workout, let's go, okay, you need to run this at it within these pace bands, but you're holding the same pace throughout the entire workout, but you've got higher cadence at certain points than others. It's going to be quite hard for them to maintain that, because as they increase their cadence, they're going to naturally be running faster. That is sort of the essential relationship between sort of cadence and speed. The higher the cadence, often the higher the speed. And the fitness aspect really comes into it with, well, how long can we maintain this high cadence for? Now, this may be a bit of an oversimplification, I get that, but I really, what I don't want to do, harking back to my last conversation with Keith, is we don't want to say, right, aim for this cadence in the warm-up, this cadence in the main set, this cadence for an interval, this cadence for an easy run, okay? That is a way for us to really get caught up. We should instead be sort of focusing on our effort and not trying to micromanage every element of our running and go, right, okay, I need to be in this heart rate zone, I need to be in this pace zone, I need to have my cadence here, and it is too much to think about, okay? Just let the cadence come naturally, but the more that you train at higher intervals, the easier that will become. But a lot of people, especially runners who sort of pride themselves on being slow, they really struggle with the speed work, and this is what holds them back, the fact they're really getting out of breath. Now, if you are allergic to speed work, other ways you can improve your cadence is in the gym with box jumps and different exercises like that, because they're going to increase your rate of force development, they're going to increase your sort of explosivity, and they really pivotal exercises to include in a program. And if you struggle with those, maybe you can do some calf raises, other exercises for the lower body to be able to improve that force production. What I sort of really don't want, what I don't like really, is when you see people who've just got themselves into a run speed rut, running along at a low cadence without, any kind of sense of, right, okay, how is it that I can get faster? How is it that I can improve? No, we're all running for different reasons. If somebody just wants to go to a park run every week and they don't care about the time, it's just a social thing. You know what? It's fair enough. But if you're training for an event and you want to, do your best, then working on making sure that you have a cadence that's around sort of, again, it depends on the individual, but sort of towards the higher end of things, sort of 175, 180, something like that. And if you look at an ultra marathon, it's going to be much lower, let's be honest, because they're running slower for a prolonged period of time. But looking to run at, a really good cadence, a nice sort of strong, higher cadence, it will really improve your running. So to wrap that up, with swimming, you want to have a reasonably high cadence. Sort of 65 is probably on the high end for most amateur swimmers, without, and it's really important, without compromising on stroke quality or stroke length. On the bike, there is a wider range, anything from the mid 70s up until sort of the 90s, I reckon, for most triathletes. Could be fine, could work, but if you are seeing great success in your cycling in the low 70s, fair enough, that may just be naturally where you sit. Don't let me be the one to tell you you're doing it wrong, especially if you're faster than me. And on the run, cadence is really critical to run speed. We do need to work on developing it, on refining it. It is one of the major signifiers of aerobic fitness, and by doing sort of lots of longer runs, speed runs, and supplementing that with explosive strength work in the gym, that will improve our running cadence, which will improve your running speed. Thank you for your company this week. I hope you found that useful. I hope there are a few takeaways. If you have any follow-up questions, please drop me an email. My email down in the show notes. Additionally, make sure that you download my app if you haven't done already. The link is in the show notes, but if not, it's Phazon Triathlon, Phazon, Phazon Triathlon, in either of the app stores. Grab that. There is a free course on pre and post workout fueling for you to claim. Cheers guys, see you all next Tuesday morning.